26101006 from 1 right, clear for takeoff.
1 right, clear to go, yeah, too fast.
Clear 4461, 1 right, line up away.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of FlightCast, the Infinite Flight podcast. I'm your host, Jason Rosewell, and this is where we talk about the mobile flight simulator, Infinite Flight. If you're an av geek but you've never heard of Infinite Flight, then head on over to the App Store on your iOS device or Google Play for Android and search for Infinite Flight. Links will be in the comments for this episode. Okay, one of the most exciting things to come to Infinite Flight for many of us has been live air traffic control. Whether you're in it for some fun, on the playground server, or you're working your way up to control on the advanced server, there's always something to learn. They say a good pilot never stops learning, and I would bet the same could be applied for air traffic controllers. Joining me on today's episode are 3 of our advanced server controllers who have real-life experience in air traffic control. First, from Santa Clarita, California, we have Michael Schoelen. Thanks for being here, Mike.
No problem.
Next, from Fort Myers, Florida, is Tristan Hensley. Tristan, welcome.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have a FlightCast regular installment from Valdosta, Georgia, Tyler Shelton. Welcome back, Tyler.
Thanks. Good to be here again.
All right, guys, thanks for being here with me today. And special thanks to Michael, who might be a new dad for the second time by the time this episode airs. Congrats, man.
Thank you.
I'm assuming that this hasn't happened yet since you're with us today.
No, my wife actually just left and to go to work, and she'll be right next to the hospital. So if I get a call, I might leave.
So if you just disappear without saying anything, we'll know where you went.
Well, you'll know I'm at the hospital, but not which one, I guess.
Right, exactly. Well, I'll just assume that you're not going to continue the interview in your car.
Sounds good.
All right, well, let's get into our questions, guys. Like we did in our last episode with Arnaud, we'll be trying to bring things back to Infinite Flight as much as possible, but I still want to get a good look into what it's like to be an air traffic controller. So let's start by hearing a bit from each of you on how you got started in air traffic control and where you're currently at with it. So, Michael, let's start with you.
So my dad's been a controller. Actually, he was a controller. He's retired now. And when they had open hiring out here in the U.S., I applied. And when you applied at that specific time, when you would apply at the location, so if you wanted to travel to every single location and put an application, you could, if they were having an open hiring. I applied in Palmdale. A couple years later, got hired. And then went to the FAA school out in Oklahoma. Came back, worked, trained for 2 years, and then I've been working ever since.
Okay, so when you say that you can apply at every location, are you talking about different centers around the country?
Yeah, it was mostly, if not all, centers. There's 24 centers in the country here, and each one of them had an open call, I guess is what it was, on one or more specific days. And you would go on that specific day. Like if it was today on a Saturday, 9/26 in Palmdale, you'd go there. Then maybe on Monday they'd have an opening in Albuquerque. You could go there, and I had some friends back at the school who worked for airlines, so they got to hop on flights and apply at each individual station.
Okay, and then did you have to have any prerequisites or qualifications before you could apply at these kind of open hirings? Yeah,
the base of it was you needed 2 years of college or 3 years progressive working experience, and they weren't specific about it, but just that you had moved along in your working, whether you got promoted or I'm not sure if having the same job would work, but
and this could be any job?
Yeah.
Okay.
My experience at the time was McDonald's, Old Navy, and owning a car shop.
Okay, so they want to see that you're ambitious and that you can hold a job.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Tristan, tell us about your ATC journey.
Well, I started Well, I got interested in air traffic control. I was about 15 years old. United Airlines used to allow you to listen to air traffic as a passenger. And I was in a ground delay program at O'Hare, and I was sitting on the ground for about an hour and a half, and I listened to the air traffic control, and I thought it sounded pretty cool. So when I got home, I did a little bit of research on how one becomes an air traffic controller, and it looked like there was two routes, college or military. And I was ready to be done with school, so I didn't want to go to college, and did some research on the military, and I decided I wanted to join the Air Force and join the delayed entry program for the Air Force. I think I was about 16 or 17, and as soon as I graduated high school at 18, I joined the Air Force and became an air traffic controller.
Okay, can you explain for us non-Americans what the delayed entry program for the Air Force means?
Oh, well, what that means is, for instance, air traffic control is a job in the Air Force that's a little more difficult to get, and people usually have to, they're almost on like a waiting list. And so if you want to actually wait for a specific job like that, there's a delay for you, or you're on a waiting list before you can actually start. For me, it was about 2 years, but you can't actually join the military until you're 18. Maybe you can at 17 with your parents' permission or something. But as far as I know, you have to be 18 years old. And so I did that when I was about 16. And then by the time I was 18, there was a position ready for me, and I joined just a few weeks after I graduated high school at 18.
Okay, so if you already know what you want to do, that's a sure way to get your foot in the door.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to get in, because when you get done with your military service, you're already experienced. And if you want to get a job as a civilian, you're not just fresh out of college, you actually have experience in the field.
Great. So just before I let you go on that, Tristan, what was next after that? So you're in the military or the Air Force, I guess, and then you're doing air traffic control. Did you work for the FAA at all after that?
Yeah, I just did tower air traffic control in the Air Force, and then when I got out, the FAA hired me, and there I did TRACON, which is terminal radar approach control, and tower. I worked at two facilities in the FAA doing tower and approach. I've never worked at a center like Michael does. So that's my experience is tower and radar.
Okay, cool. And then Tyler, you've got, I guess, a more similar story to Tristan's than to Mike's. Why don't you explain where you're at right now and how you got there?
Yeah, it was pretty similar to Tristan's with the delayed entry program, but my start was a little confusing because I originally went to college for music. I was a trombone player, played for about 15 years. So I was studying jazz, got through about 2 years, and it wasn't working. So really the next thing I was interested in was law enforcement. So I went to the police academy, which I think Tristan did too, right?
Yes, I did. I did go to the police academy a couple years ago.
So there you go. So we're on the same track here. So I went through that, and getting a job was just impossible in Florida. I applied tons of different agencies, went through a lot of the hiring processes and stuff. And so eventually I thought, okay, I'm going to join the Air Force. And when you join the Air Force, you take a test called the ASVAB, where pretty much just basic knowledge, and that'll qualify you for a certain list of jobs. So like Tristan did, I just did a lot of research. And air traffic was one of the ones that I really wanted to hold out for. So I went into the delayed entry program, and typically they only give you about a year. So if you want a certain job, okay, you can wait for it. You're going to be delayed starting, but after a year, it's just kind of like they're going to give you a job and you're leaving. So Christmas Day, actually, and I was about a week away from hitting my year, they called saying that there was an air traffic job. So I took it, and it's a pretty long process, but I just got my air traffic control rating in July 28th of this year. So I am a brand new controller compared to the many years that these two have.
Tyler's the baby controller.
I am. I have a lot to learn.
And yet, you've been a huge part of helping create the ATC side of Infinite Flight. So you're not a baby air traffic controller in the game.
Not at all.
Not a terrible way to put it. Tyler, you're not a baby. Let me just clarify that.
I do appreciate that.
No problem.
I think he is.
Yeah. Okay. Well, instead of talking about that too much, why don't we move on? It sounds like there are several different paths that you guys have taken to get into this line of work. Mike, had you ever considered going the Air Force route to get your foot in the door?
Yeah, it wasn't specifically Air Force related, but military. I went to the Marine recruitment, and after I had talked to them, and then I had talked to my dad who was in the Navy, he kind of talked me out of everything, because back when he went in, they would offer you one job and they would give you another. And he said, he told me, you really don't want to get stuck in that if it's not going to be what you want to do. So, and after they started pressuring me, I just kind of dropped it altogether. So I guess, yeah, it wasn't specific to Air Force, but I had looked into the military.
Okay. So, Mike, before I let you go here, you mentioned that to me earlier that you're working on building new climb and descent profiles at your center. Are you working on that exclusively right now, or is that in addition to your work as a controller? And maybe you can just explain kind of what that all means.
Yeah. So there's a few approaches and centers who have worked together, as well as the towers in different regions, who have built Metroplex programs that kind of optimize climbs and descents for the airlines so that they can save on money. Just a mile shortcut over the thousands of flights they do a day can be a big cost savings at the end of the year. So it's come out to us now, and we have to date, at least in the U.S., the largest program. I think we're going to have somewhere like around 180 new SIDS and stars total throughout all the region. And for LA Center, we control, it's kind of different than the game. We control as a center from the Mexico border line over to about, if you did a route line over to Vegas and straight down, and then we go up to the Bakersfield, Avenal, San Luis Obispo area, and then out to the ocean about 200 miles. So we have a lot more airspace than what's in the game that you see. And we have more airports than what you see in there as well. So what they do is, at the beginning, I did not work for a while on the floor. They had to pull me off the floor to go down to and meet with SoCal Approach team members that we work with daily. And they would come up to us. We would go down to them week after week, building these routes and altitudes and tying them into new arrivals or to new RNAV approaches. And now we're to the point where I'll work on it, one day, maybe 2 days a week, and I work the rest of the week. But since I'm transitioning to LAX, I'm actually turning that project over to somebody else at the center right now for my area.
Okay, so you just mentioned that you're transitioning to LAX. So what does that mean? Tower frequencies, what's next for you?
Yeah, a lot of studying's in my future. There's going to be, from what I've heard, it's one of the harder programs to pass. They have about a 60% washout rate down there. So just, everything. I've never really, it's kind of hard to explain when you explain to people that you're an air traffic controller at a center, but going to a tower is a whole new ballgame. So I guess, one of the closest ways I can think about explaining it is, say you're you're a baseball player and you play in the MLB, and all of a sudden you decide, I want to be a basketball player. I mean, you're still an athlete, but almost nothing is going to match up.
Well, in that case, you might be Michael Jordan in reverse, right?
I mean, it's possible if I can get through this program. We'll see what happens.
That'll be your new nickname on Slack, Jordan.
I think it'll be a piece of cake for you.
Oh, I really don't think it's going to happen that way.
So I like this kind of chain of questioning. So you kind of led into my next one. When you applied at Los Angeles Center, is that kind of an open door into the FAA for you? And can you transfer back and forth? Say you're moving across the country. Is that something that's possible, or how does that work?
Yeah. So once you get into the FAA, they have a website, and it's even the website now that somebody who wasn't or is not an air traffic controller could apply to, as long as they meet the certain criteria that's published in each individual application. But, once you're in, it's a lot easier to transfer throughout the system. They have a process called the ERR, which is a employee request for reassignment. So you're asking to go somewhere else. And then on top of that, they have bid offers where, let's say LA needed people. They might have a stack of papers of people who are in the ERR program who want to just transfer, but then they might need to open a bid, and then they might get a new stack of people who are trying to apply because they see that the tower needs people. So it's a lot easier to move throughout the system once you get in and get certified.
So Tristan, Mike is explaining kind of how he was, the system for moving from Center to LAX Tower. You mentioned to me before that you had started in one place and then you ended up in Buffalo. Was it a similar transition for you once you're already working for the FAA? How did that work?
Well, before you get in the FAA, it's really hard to actually pick a facility. You just want to get your foot in the door. But once you're in, it's a little bit easier to move around. It's not common. I didn't stay at one facility very long before I transferred. I believe there's probably a norm of a certain amount of years before you actually transfer. I did mine a little bit quicker because I knew someone at another facility, and that's kind of how I transferred. I don't think I used the official way that Michael had mentioned.
Maybe you just greased somebody's palm and that's how you got the job.
That could be.
Tristan, while I'm talking to you, what are some of the differences between maybe differences in practice or procedure between working for the FAA and doing air traffic control in the military?
Well, technically, all the rules are the same. The military, there's a federal aviation regulation. It's called the 7110.65. It's titled Air Traffic Control, and the Air Force uses that, and they're bound by it. But the Air Force also has another air traffic control manual that is put out by the Air Force, and so air traffic control in the Air Force has two manuals that they need to follow. So in some ways, the military does things a little bit different, and also sometimes they go, I don't want to say above and beyond, but they add some things that the FAA doesn't do. The military may do something in addition to what the norm is.
Okay. Well, and Tyler, you've mentioned to me before too that you've got different training scenarios, right? Because I'm assuming with the military, you're for the most part you're controlling heavy cargo planes and fighters.
Correct.
So you've got to do training exercises in the dark,
right?
Which I would assume that the FAA, and guys, you need to coach me here, but the FAA would have procedures for when the lights all go out in a power outage. But Tyler, you're actually in there practicing for it on a regular basis, right?
Right, correct. And I mean, there's really just kind of different procedures. I'm sure the FAA has procedures, for power outages or for no light procedures and stuff like that. But a lot of it is just base specific. We do a lot of like night vision operations at night, not necessarily where the controllers will have night vision goggles on, but we turn all the airfield lights off. So you're just looking out and it's pitch black. We turn down the tower cab lights, and you just kind of trust on the position reports from the aircraft and use your radar. And we have different rules for that. Like I know for our base, no more than 4 aircraft flights would be considered a single aircraft, and certain requirements for if there's a non-participating aircraft, the lights have to be turned on before they're inside 10 miles. So just different stuff like that keeps it pretty safe, but still allows them to accomplish the mission.
Tyler, now you said something about lights out. Are you talking about like you guys don't have a generator there at your facility?
We do have a generator, but so there's like a backup to the backup. So there's procedures in case there's a complete power failure and for some reason the generator doesn't go from commercial to generator power.
I see. I've lost power on probably 5 or 6 cases when I was in the FAA, and everything would just kind of shut off for 5 or 10 seconds, and then everything was back up with the generator. I don't remember having additional training like what to do if the generator doesn't work. I don't know. Maybe Michael has experienced that, or I don't know what the center has as far as backup power or whatever.
Yeah, we incur the same thing that you did. If the power goes out, like we've had a lightning strike near the local power source, and then the lights go out for 10 seconds or so, but then they come right back on. Everything gets reset, except for your scopes were never touched. Basically, everything's still running while the lights in the building are off. But I think
it's pretty seamless now, though.
So Tyler, I would assume that your guys are also, your pilots are also training for, no light, no visual flying when they're abroad as well.
Correct. Yeah, they're
when they're off base.
Yeah, everything they do is to prepare for, I guess, real world scenarios. So we've actually had a chance to look through their night vision goggles just to see kind of what they're looking at. Man, they're crystal clear. Like you can see everything out there. I didn't think it would work as well as they described, but it's pretty cool. They do a lot of that out on the range. So when they're practicing shooting and stuff like that, they're just doing everything through night vision goggles.
Okay. All right, guys. So before we move this to infinite flight, the question that everybody wants answered is this one. We hear all the time that being an air traffic controller can be one of the most stressful jobs you can have. I would assume that this largely depends on what facility you're working at and the nature of your position. So can each of you guys touch on that? You're saying, Mike, that the position that you're going to pretty soon, it sounds like that could be the case since there's a high turnover rate and a high flush out rate. So maybe, I don't know, maybe Tristan has the most experience in the high stress position, but can you guys talk about that a little bit?
Who's first?
Not everybody at once. Let's go
We
with
need an order here.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Tristan, why don't you comment on that?
Well, the way that I see it is I don't think it personally that it's a stressful job. I've heard, the same types of things that people say that it is. But if you're working at a very busy facility, the FAA has different facility levels. I think it goes up to a 12 or a 13, if I remember correctly. But if you're at one of the busier facilities, there's more controllers. And so they break them down into what they call sectors. So if you're at a slower facility, your airspace or your sector may be quite large, where if you're working in a high volume facility, your sector would be much smaller. So the amount of traffic you're working can actually sometimes be similar, even if you're working, say, at
O'Hare Tower or a facility that's nothing like working at O'Hare. They may have two local or tower controllers or 2 or 3 ground controllers, where at other facilities, there's not as much traffic, so there's only one person doing that position. So they do kind of they make it a little bit easier in that regard.
Okay. Mike, can you comment on that?
Yeah. I mean, whenever and I'm sure these guys have experienced the same thing, but whenever you say you're a controller, that's the first question that always comes up. And to me, I mean, when you went through training, or when I went through training at least, it was very stressful. Day after day, you come home and you don't think you're going to make it through, and you don't think that you're good enough for the job because you don't even understand what's going on. But once you get a hold of everything and you understand the routes and the climb rates and where your traffic spots are, where you're most likely to have a deal, or where 2 airplanes would come close to each other, basically to me it's just like any other job. To learn it is stressful because there's a lot of stuff to learn at every job, but once you're in there, I mean, it's just like second nature, and it's a lot of fun, actually.
I want to actually add to that about, I didn't really think about the training aspect of it when you were talking about, the stress of it. And I certainly agree that whether it was Air Force training, and I'm sure Tyler can talk about that too, when you're in training, that can be very stressful. I've seen a number of controllers get washed out in the military and in the FAA, and that was certainly a stressful part of the job, was just getting through training.
So Mike, when you were talking about descent rates and climb rates, have you ever had a pilot audibly frustrated with you because you asked them to make a turn that was a little too sporty, or a descent or a climb that was unrealistic for them?
I don't, as far as climb rates and stuff, they're usually pretty just straightforward about, we could do that or we can't do that. The turns, when they get vectored a lot, they definitely don't like that. If it's once or twice, it's not a big deal, but sometimes they'll come back with comments because they come from, for our LA arrival sector, they come from Oakland Center. And, Oakland Center is trying to pitch us a certain amount of miles and trail, and then we may or may not have to gain more space from that. So as they come over, they've already been vectored and, speed adjusted, and we don't know specifically what kind of flow restrictions have been put on Oakland Center. We just know what we're required to give SoCal approach. So we might have to vector them for another, gain another 5 or 10 miles, and they'll come back with like little snotty remarks about here we go again or something like that. But, generally they're all pretty good about it.
Guys, I like this question from Dale McLaughlin on Facebook. He's saying, if you could control anywhere in the world, is there an airfield that you'd particularly like to control, and why?
Yeah, I think as far as military goes, I've always wanted to go to Nellis Air Force Base, which is in Las Vegas, only because they do the red flag exercises every year, so you really get to see a good mix of traffic. So, I mean, you have, everything from fighters to heavies to tankers to commercial aircraft coming in and out, whereas a lot of bases, they're kind of restricted to just what they have there. I know at my base we have the A-10, the C-130, and the HH-60, and then also A-29s from an Afghani training squadron. So you really get limited to, only those 4 aircraft, and sometimes that's all you see unless, something special like people coming back from a deployment or people going away. That's when you start to see some of the heavies. But places like Nellis, they get pretty wide varieties of traffic on a daily basis, which is pretty intriguing to me.
And when we see videos on YouTube about, some of the U.S. Air Force aircraft training with their guns and stuff like that, are they being deployed out of an Air Force base like Nellis, or is that from somewhere else?
They go from from really anywhere. Attached to our class Delta at our base, we actually have a range that fills up probably about half of the airspace. So I can look out the tower window right behind me and see the A-10s shooting rockets, shooting their guns, and everything else. So the fighters and everything can be deployed from anywhere. But places like Nellis have a bit of a higher ops tempo where people are deploying more maybe compared to other places. And they also have a much bigger range to offer because they're right there at the desert. So,
right. Well, Tyler, we actually didn't ask you about the stress level question. So now I know there's days where everybody's deployed and you don't have as much action, but are there any situations, training exercises, real life situations yet? I know you're pretty new to the job, but anything that kind of gets your heart pumping?
Yeah, I would say we'll go back and talk about training here in a minute, but for now, I would say the biggest thing that might be a little different from the FAA is in the military, there's what's called recoveries, and that's usually when just everybody comes back at the same time rather than a steady pace. So sometimes we launch all the aircraft and they'll go up, they'll do their training missions, and we might sit there and not talk to anyone for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then all of a sudden everyone is flashing on your scope and they're all coming back at the same time. And a lot of times they're all requesting, the overhead pattern. One wants a straight in, one wants a high tactical recovery procedure, which is where they'll be at like 10,000 feet over the field and they just roll over and just drop straight down to the downwind from 10,000 feet. So a lot of it just happens at one time and you're trying to piece it together in this three-dimensional, airspace. So for me, I would say that's probably the most stressful part of it. But I really don't see it as stress, more of kind of an adrenaline rush to me. And I'm sure the others would agree with that.
That causes me anxiety just to hear you say that. They're all coming in and flashing on your radar at the same time.
But it's kind of fun. It's one big puzzle, and, you're giving traffic calls, sequencing people, letting them know, kind of painting that big picture, like you're number 2 to the field, or, that guy that's holding at 10,000, hold over the field, expect descent, behind flight of 2 that are 2 mile initial. Stuff like that, it really just kind of paints that picture. And to me, it's pretty fun. But being newly rated and becoming an air traffic controller, I would say the most stressful part has been training. I'm not sure how it is in the FAA, but I can guarantee that Tristan has gone through this too. The Air Force has what's called skill levels. So when you're first starting and you're an air traffic control apprentice, you're what's called a 3 level. And they pretty much refer to you as a 3 level in the facility. Hey, 3 level. And as a 3 level, you're basically useless, and they let you know that. So you're going through training, and your day-to-day is you're like the facility janitor. So a lot of days you're sweeping and mopping the stairs. You're doing cleanup every day. You do what's called chow runs. So you're going out to restaurants and picking up everybody's lunches, sometimes like 15 orders. Okay, yeah. I think we all operate on chow runs for sure.
This sounds like the position that we would assign Dale if we were all kind of a group working together.
But so you're expected to, get in position, really know your stuff. You had an issue the day before with sequencing, like you get in the next day, that should be completely taken care of. So, on a full day, you're doing the tower simulator, you're getting in position, whether it's ground control, local, which is tower, or flight data. And you're also doing these small side jobs in between. So a lot of it gets taken home and you're studying at home because you just don't have that time at work. And it can be kind of sobering because some of your best friends, you go through training and you do everything you can to help them. But the job just isn't for everybody. So it does kind of suck to see some of your friends get washed out at times. And I'm sure Tristan and Michael have, seen the same through their technical training or even once they got to their first facility.
And I want to add on the chow run that I found the 3 level job that the chow run was the most stressful because everybody's food has to be exactly as they ordered it. That's way more important than air traffic control, is the way that their food is. Everything needs to be hot. If somebody said no ketchup, there better not be ketchup on it.
Or no seeds on the bun, so you got to pick them all off in the parking lot.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, you guys are painting such a fun picture for me. And by the way, I'm, as you guys know, I'm up in Canada. If I use the wrong word, military, Air Force, I may use the word army at some point. Okay, we don't need to crucify the podcaster here.
You wouldn't be the first one to do that. When you say military, people say army.
It's like, if for any Arrested Development fans, these are my awards, mother, from Army. Throw in a little Buster accent. So, all right. Yeah, that may make it. It may not. So let's get back to the where do we want to control? So, Michael, you're going to LAX, but if you could pick anywhere in the world, where do you find yourself?
Well, I chose LA because it's the top, as far as aircraft movement, I guess it's the top 3. So, if I make it there, my next goal, which I would never actually be able to move there, but it would be Atlanta, because it's been number 1 for the top 5 years. And
when you say number 1, is that
one for the last 5 years?
That's number 1 in terms of traffic,
or
in terms of quality?
At least from what I've seen, aircraft movement, based upon aircraft movement, they've been number 1 for the last 5 years.
Wow. And Atlanta's a major hub for, is it American? Or
I actually don't know, because it's too far out from us. But
it's Delta.
I think it's Delta,
Delta.
and AirTran.
Okay.
Which is now Southwest.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. All right, it's time finally to bring this around after 45 minutes to Infinite Flight, which is, of course, why we're all here. And so, Mike, you're working at Los Angeles Center almost every day. What makes you want to come home from a long day and then, rock a little bit of ATC on a flight simulator? What is it about it that does that for you?
Well, one is, I can work the tower, even the approach, which is just like another level of, it's almost like playing a different game, I consider going to work almost like playing a game. Essentially that's what you're doing. You're just trying to fit pieces of puzzles together to make one big puzzle, without screwing anything up. But the other thing is, it's like another challenge, to be able to do it in real life when you have a microphone and you can talk directly to the airplanes is totally different than trying to find each little command on a screen and then get unable, like more times than you've ever heard in your whole career out of one airplane. And just trying to find, like, okay, well, if you don't want to descend, how about you turn? Well, if you don't want to turn, how about you speed change? And then you finally, either they finally listen to you, or you find out they just don't want to listen to you and they leave your frequency. But, it's just another challenge for me.
Well, Arnaut asked a similar question on Facebook last night or this morning when he said something like, I don't have it in front of me, what are the most annoying things that you notice out of, it was actually out of new air traffic controllers. So let's say somebody's been, we won't, of course, name any names, but you've got your brand new controller on the advanced server. They're not used to pilots actually listening to them for the most part on the playground server, unless, you get lucky sometimes. But, what are the things that I guess you guys see that drives you crazy? In terms of maybe pilots or air traffic controllers in game?
I'd like to go first on this one.
Tristan, we don't have 50 minutes for this, okay? So try and keep it brief.
Okay, I'm watching the clock. The only thing that bothers me a little bit is, and this comes from doing air traffic in real world, I don't like undue delays. Sometimes some of the newer controllers, they say you've got a line of aircraft that are departing, and you're waiting to get people departed after, every time someone lands, one's departing, and I'll watch, and they're kind of a little bit slow to put someone into position and hold, or when someone's departed, they're waiting way too long to have the next one depart, and it's just a little pet peeve of mine personally, just from real life. I mean, you get people going as quick as you possibly can, without making them sit on the runway or holding short of a runway for too long.
Well, and that's something that we look for when we're starting out a candidate when we're testing, right? The very first thing we do is request pushback. So it's a little nerve-wracking because there's a lot of us sitting there maybe on the tarmac, which I just learned actually the word tarmac is an American thing, but that's a little side note. So we're sitting there at the terminal and we request pushback. That's a pretty simple thing to be able to execute as a controller. As Mark pointed out in our group chat, congratulations, you did really well at logging into the tower frequency and the ground frequency, but there's more to it, right? So let's get beyond that, and I've requested pushback and I'm not hearing anything. So, there's the odd time where the controller's having connection issues. A lot of time they're just sitting there nervous as heck and they're sweating. We've all been there. I had nervous sweats in my test. It's nerve-wracking. You want to do well. You want to be a part of the crew. It's happening and people are watching. So, quick commands are super important. And that's the first thing that we look for in our test.
Right. And I think going off what Tristan said is just expediting the whole flow. A lot of times people, when there's a huge line of departures, they'll depart the first guy and then tell the next one to line up and wait. But then you get this huge delay before the next takeoff clearance. When a lot of times, as soon as that first guy is rolling, just clear the next guy. By the time he gets on the runway and starts rolling himself, you have more than enough separation. So sometimes that line up and wait isn't always useful. Now, line up and wait, if you had a Cessna 208 depart with an F-16 behind it, okay, I'm going to line up and wait, build some space, wait for the Cessna to turn off, something like that, and then launch right away. But a lot of times that unnecessary space, it's going to do you way more harm than good. And the same can be said for arrivals. If you have aircraft on the downwind and they're following someone on final, when you say, I'll call your base, and you send them 10 miles behind that guy, you just loosened up your pattern to the point where they're going to be overflowing for 20 miles before people are turning base.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and line up and wait can be one of your best friends as you're controlling on a tower frequency, like Tyler was saying, because it's not always appropriate, of course, but that's one of my favorite buttons because you've got somebody who's on their takeoff roll. We don't have to worry about jet wash or even wake turbulence in this game yet. So, line up and wait, get the other person on the runway ready to go if your incoming traffic is still, more than what would you guys say, 5 nautical miles away? 6?
I'd say it depends on the performance. If you've got a Cessna 172, then that's on final, or you've got a, like Tyler mentioned, a fighter, you're going to adjust that, and you're also going to look at their ground speed on the radar to figure out what's the safe distance to get another aircraft departed before they land.
Right. And I think Tristan and I talked about this on the phone this morning, actually. I think our separation standards for real life compared to infinite flight are completely different. I mean, we have really specific, IFR departure rules and category separation, wake turbulence separation on the instrument approach and stuff. But I mean, for me, I'll cut it pretty close. 3 miles is maybe my cutoff. As long as that departure is airborne before the next guy crosses the landing threshold, then, or, if the arrival is off the runway before the next guy crosses the threshold, I mean, it's good to go as far as I see it.
Yeah, and it can be actually a pretty fun exercise to try and do what you're describing, Tyler. And if all else fails, if somebody's got to sit on the runway for a little extra longer, and we don't know why, maybe they're having device issues or something, a go around isn't the end of the world. And actually, gives the pilot a little bit more flight time. Although we do get blasted for that once in a while.
Exactly, I prefer a go around over extending downwind for 10 miles for no reason.
Sure. Tristan, tell us how you got involved with Infinite Flight.
Well, I think I went on the App Store with Apple, and I searched Flight Simulator, and that was one of the ones that came up. And I looked at some reviews for Infinite Flight, and I downloaded it, and I immediately liked it. And within probably 3 days of downloading it, I had bought the Live Plus subscription because I wanted all the aircraft and all the airports. And from there, I found the fan group on Facebook,
and I joined that, and that's how I got involved with the air traffic. I probably mentioned to somebody that I was an air traffic controller, and that's how I got involved with the air traffic side on Infinite Flight too.
And what's your favorite position to control in the game?
Well, I like tower because I get the extra operations. But the position that I find to be the most fun is approach control, because you really have full control of, where aircraft are going. You can have everybody lined up, the exact spacing that you want. And in the tower, you don't have as much control. You can kind of just a generic speed control that you use in the tower, or you're sequencing who they're following. You can't really tell them exactly how many miles to be behind the aircraft in front of them. It's kind of up to the pilot, and so I like tower and approach, but I like approach the best, I think.
And as we talk about how we got started with the game, Tyler, you've explained this to us in a previous episode, how you kind of got started, and for any listeners who are curious to know about that aren't sure what we're talking about, go back and listen to episode 1 where I interviewed Tyler, and he tells us all about how he kind of got involved in the game and what his current position is. But actually, dude, you've been promoted since then to an actual real job. Can you share any of that with us?
Yeah, it's been in the works for quite some time now. I've just been doing a lot of work on the air traffic side. Obviously, it started back in the kind of earlier beta stages where Matt and I collaborated on a lot of the, what should be introduced to this, and, how the system should be set up to, I guess, best fit Infinite Flight. And it's just kind of grown from there to where I've kind of taken over as a bit of a community manager for the air traffic control side, being there to answer questions, kind of keep the whole controller group organized with a little bit of structure and kind of procedures and some guidance on, how do we handle ghosting? How do we handle different events and protocol, stuff like that. So eventually just kind of evolved to me being hired with Flying Development Studio as a air traffic control community manager.
So now when you're sitting there in your tower with nothing to do, you can just plan Infinite Flight stuff. Right.
Of course, no devices in the tower.
Of course, no device in the tower. We know that. You're not taking pictures for us or anything like that behind the scenes. We don't want any commanding officers to be listening in and getting the wrong idea.
Exactly.
Mike, can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with Infinite Flight, if you haven't already abandoned us for the hospital?
Yeah. So mine was a lot like Tristan's. Mine was, I was out on vacation, not really vacation. I took a fan flight, which is, I got to sit in the cockpit and take a flight out for learning purposes with the FAA on a flight to Hawaii. And went out there, was hanging out, and I'm like, okay, I want to, I had this new iPad, and I was like, let me check out some kind of flight game. So, Infinite Flight's one of the first ones that comes up, and I read all the different reviews, and I decided to pick Infinite Flight because they talk about, I don't know, maybe based off the reviews, I don't remember. But I spent, I think, all 4 days I was out there on the balcony flying airplanes.
So, you're in Hawaii. You're in Hawaii.
And I'm flying airplanes on an iPad.
That sounds so ridiculous when you say it out loud.
The porch or the balcony was like facing the ocean, so I felt like I was getting the best of both worlds.
Did you have some kind of a fancy drink in your hand at least?
No.
No. Okay.
No drinking while flying. You know that.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Depends on what time of day it is, I guess.
Exactly.
So, guys, do you have Tyler? We know that you're on your way to getting your PPL at some point soon. I've got that in my 5-year plan. For Tristan and Mike, any plans to? First of all, are you pilots? Do you plan on being?
I have a few flight hours, but I actually don't enjoy flying. I enjoy being a passenger in any type of aircraft. I like the scenery, and when I was doing my pilot training, there was too much focus on, oh, look at this, look at your turn coordinator, I didn't want to look at gauges. I wanted to look out the window and see what I could see.
You're like that kid. You're like the kid playing baseball, the 6-year-old playing baseball who's like building sandcastles in the outfield.
Exactly. I had no interest in what they were trying to teach me, as far as the flying went. But I love being in aircraft. I love flying. I just don't want to focus on that. I'd rather be focusing on the scenery.
I appreciate a pilot with enough self-awareness to realize that before they get too far into the game. Mike, what about you?
I've gone up a couple times just with my dad, who had a couple planes and has since sold them. But I rarely went up with him. But I do have about 45 minutes in a 737 at the Southwest Sim flight simulator, so that was fun.
Nice. Okay, so I like it. There's varying degrees of interest in being a pilot, being air traffic control. I have no interest whatsoever at this time in my life in pursuing air traffic controlling, but obviously I get my fix by playing Infinite Flight. All right, let's move along a little bit. Well, guys, we got to speed it up a little bit. We've been chatting for a while now. So I want to get to some fan questions. But before we do, Tyler, real quick, we discussed what you'd like to see next for ATC and Infinite Flight. You've been a big part, as we've said, of the evolution of the ATC portion. Is there anything you can share with us at this point in terms of what's coming next for air traffic control development with Matt and Felipe and those guys?
Yeah, really what I look for is just what all the controllers want. It's really not what I want too much. I would like to see more flight planning. So where you can actually file an altitude or a speed and stuff like that. That way, whenever you're being passed a center, they can see what you filed and stuff like that. But through our air traffic communications, we actually have a little suggestion box where people can add stuff in. So the biggest hits right now are holding patterns. So a lot of times when you're out there flying and you're like, why am I being vectored away? They're actually trying to hold you. So holding patterns are a big one. With the last update, you see that now we have GPS approaches that were available with the Autoland. So we're hoping to get around to adding GPS approaches and at fields where there's no ILS, and even down to small things like when you check in with center approach, whenever you say with you, instead of us just saying Roger, it'd be radar contact, so it's a little more realistic. So these are all just suggestions that I channel up. Nothing definitive right now, but I know Matt definitely wants to work on some things to make it a lot more realistic for us.
I wonder who the brilliant person with the radar contact suggestion was.
I'm not sure. He's pretty annoying. I think he does. I think he does podcasts or something on the side.
Man, my subscription just renewed, and I was like, Matt, you gotta hook your favorite podcaster up with a subscription.
Did he hook you up?
No, he didn't hook me up. I have to pay just like all the rest of you guys do.
Nice.
Tyler said something that I really liked about the altitude request. That has been something that's bothered me a little bit from having experience in real world, and Tyler working in the tower, he sees, every aircraft has a flight progress strip, and if they're flying IFR, it has their requested altitude on there. The center sees it too. But in Infinite Flight right now, we, as an approach controller, a center controller, we're kind of guessing what the pilot wants, and in a lot of cases you issue an altitude and then they say so and so is requesting this altitude, but it was just because we had guessed it. But if we had something that told us what that pilot wants to cruise at, the altitude they want to cruise at, it would be less communication or less frequency congestion, and we would know right away where they want to be flying at.
Awesome. It might have been Ian Rodriguez on Facebook, Mike, that asked, how does controlling an Infinite Flight, so let's say working at LAX Center, compare to the real thing?
There's a pretty huge difference. It's like moderately the same, but I'm always having to train myself to learn to, mold myself to Infinite Flight when I come in for the Friday night flights. And then sometimes I find myself having to transition myself back to work mode, which becomes a problem for me. I used to play Infinite Flight on breaks, but just the smallest errors in work will bother me. So I decide, I don't want to cause any issues. But things like people being on full stars, giving them crossing restrictions, and these are things that Tyler's built into the Friday night flights. But crossing restrictions where you just give them an altitude restriction and then they know the speeds along the arrival. Things that they're talking about, like preloaded altitude requests, and being able to put people in hold, are all kind of, we don't, as Infinite Flight controllers, we don't specifically know what every aircraft wants to do, especially when they check in VFR at flight level 260. So I mean, things like that are really, it's like, this guy is flying south. I think he's going to San Diego, but he refuses to respond to me. So just stuff like that on a day-to-day basis. There's so much information in real world controlling that you know pretty much everything. Their planned ground speed. Their planned altitude. The exact routing they want to fly. You can give them a shortcut to a fix instead of giving them a heading. They have windows to depart. They have, sequencing to land. There's a whole bunch of things. And a lot of times while I'm controlling, I'll come up with ideas in my head of, I need to suggest this or that. And as soon as I'm done with the session, like especially after the Friday night flights, my brain's just so fried from all the different vectors and unables and all that different stuff that I forget what I wanted to suggest.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way. Sometimes I might find what I think might be a bug or something, and then by the time I'm done my flight, I don't even remember what it was, or my controlling session. But that says a lot, I think, about your passion for what you do, because how many of us can say in our daily jobs that we're going to take a break and go do the exact same thing on our device. Like I don't sit here coding a website and then decide I'm going to take a coffee break out on my patio and do some coding for fun. There's sometimes where I'm so absorbed in the job that I'm working on that I might work through my break, but I think it's really cool that you can, you love the field that you're in so much that, I'm going to sit down on my break and pretend to do the same thing. But guys, let's take a few listener questions. Unless does anybody want to add to that before we move on?
Yeah. It's funny when I used to go on break and play in the break room, and people would come down and they started to know that I was playing the game because they would hear control instructions coming out of this iPad, and they tell me, they pay you to do that exact same thing upstairs.
Yeah, it would seem kind of strange, and in fact, I tell people that I run a podcast, and they say, I didn't know you did a podcast. What is it about? And that's when I go, oh, I shouldn't have told this person that I'm doing a podcast. Well, let me start by saying this is probably the nerdiest thing you've ever heard in your life, but here it goes. And some people surprise you and they go, no way, that's amazing, I'm going to go listen to it. Or some people that just laugh right in my face. So you never know.
At least they're honest.
At least they're honest. Those are how you know you're true friends, right? If
That's
they can
right.
Just laugh in your face. But anyway, guys, let's move on to some listener questions. We tossed it out there on Facebook again, and for any listeners who aren't sure what I'm talking about, you can definitely follow and like FlightCast on Facebook, and we'll talk about some other things at the end of the episode that you can do to track what we're doing. But also, I post all the time on Infinite Flight fan group, so if you're not a member of IFFG, I'm sure Jay and all those guys would love it if you would go and become a member. And there's lots and lots of Infinite Flight talk and chatter on there, as well as lots of screenshots. So if you're just jonesing for a screenshot of a pretend airplane, that's the place to go and take a look. So our friend Ryan has asked, would you guys recommend being a real-life air traffic controller? Let's start with Tyler.
Me personally, I would say absolutely. I think it's it's honestly the most fun I've ever had, and I go to work and I get paid to do it. So you really can't beat it. And for me, I don't like the idea of getting complacent in a job where you go and it's the same thing day after day, which I'm sure Tristan can agree that might be the same thing that led him towards law enforcement, because no 2 days are the same. But with air traffic control, you go into work and, every day there's a binder in the tower that has new procedures that are put into place. So, right when you're comfortable and you're like, oh, okay, I understand how to do this. Well, now there's a new procedure and everything's totally different.
So maybe Tristan, you can comment on that. You've moved from air traffic control to law enforcement and now into getting your law degree. So how do you see, would you recommend air traffic control to anybody?
Absolutely. Especially if it's somebody who loves aviation, I think it's a great career. It pays well, and on many days, your day will fly by. I mean, there's days that traffic is really slow and the day goes by slow, but there's other days that you could put in 8 hours and you feel like you've been there for a half hour or 45 minutes because you were just so busy and the time just flew by.
And what about you, Mike?
Yeah, I think how could you not recommend being a controller when you are one, unless you absolutely hate the job? But I love doing this, and obviously, otherwise I probably wouldn't jump on it. Infinite Flight ATC. But as long as your personality can hold it, if you're an uptight person or easily stressed out, maybe you don't want to. But I wouldn't let that stop you from trying.
Cool. So Ian and Erwin both wanted to know, have you guys ever had to respond to a real emergency situation before? And if so, can you describe how it was handled?
I'm going to go first.
Go ahead. All yours.
Oh, that was mean. We need to delete that.
Go for it.
Well, actually at Milwaukee, we had a Midwest regional jet that they had smoke in the flight deck, and it was in the cabin also. And that aircraft came in, and apparently the visibility on the flight deck was pretty bad. And, we had all the emergency vehicles and stuff like that, and they all evacuated on the runway at Milwaukee from that little incident. And, as a controller, you deal with emergencies almost on a daily basis. When I was in the military, some of them were kind of silly, but the military or these airlines have rules about what's an emergency and what's not. And sometimes, they're just required to declare an emergency, even though you may not agree that it's an actual emergency.
Okay. And just as a side note, do any of you guys know, like in that situation, maybe Tristan, you might know, would that be in a regional jet? Can they do a Cat 3 auto land if they don't have any visibility in the flight deck?
Well, the only aircraft that I know, first of all, the airport has to have the proper equipment for a Cat 3 landing, and the only aircraft or airline that I know of that the pilots have the training, the aircraft has the training, would be Frontier Airlines. They're 319, Airbus 319, I think it is. And the pilots have to be certified, the aircraft has to be certified, and the airport has to be certified. So there's a lot of rules to do that sort of approach. It is certainly possible, and I've seen aircraft do it before, but it's certainly not common.
Okay, and I guess that would be different in the States and in different parts of the world as well. All right, let's get to the next question. Actually, Tyler, you were going to talk about an emergency, I think.
Yeah, like Tristan was saying, it's almost daily, but for the military, especially dealing with fighters, it's and a fighter that's as old as the A-10, they have what's called a hung gun every day, which is where they're out on the range shooting their gun and it fails to safe, so they can't put it back in safe mode, or sometimes there's just a round stuck in there. So they actually come back and they have to land, and they'll point the jet towards the gun berm, and the fire department and everyone else will go out there, and the weapons specialists, and they'll try to safe the gun. And for us, that's almost like a daily event. but it can be kind of a pain sometimes because it typically happens at the worst possible time.
So, like when you're trying to pick poppy seeds off of a bun in the parking lot.
Exactly. It's always during a recovery. So when everyone else is coming back, and then obviously emergencies have the right of way over everyone. And after that emergency lands, it suspends the runway. So you have to wait for the airfield vehicle to come out and do a pretty much foreign object or debris sweep, FOD sweep, so that we can resume operations on that runway. So for us, having parallel runways, anytime that emergency comes in during a recovery, you're now down to one runway.
That's another great use for a level 3 air traffic controller, just have them stick their arm in there and see if they can find anything.
I wouldn't be surprised if they started to do that.
They would.
All right, let's keep going. Oh, Mike, did you have anything to add to that? Center's got to be a whole different scenario in terms of emergencies because people are at cruising altitude for the most part, yeah?
Yeah. We've had, engine out, smoke in the cockpit from, we had one smoke in the cockpit from Hawaii, and we worked them outbound. They turned around because they started getting smoke in the cockpit, and then they decided that it was best to, obviously it's best to turn around. And we sent them in to Los Angeles on 7 left, I think. 7 left or right. It ended up being on the news later that night, and I didn't know, but I went home and, I was at my in-laws that night and like, oh, hey, I worked that guy.
That's cool. And nobody would ever know.
Yeah, no.
You guys get all of the stress and none of the glory.
Well, yeah, but then the towers, you get the worst made of everything, it seems like.
Well, and and I guess you're about to find that out pretty soon.
Right.
We'll have to have another. Actually, let's plan to have another chat with you when you're finally working at LAX Tower.
Yeah, let me get through training first.
Well, I think it sounds like you'll be a shoo-in.
No pressure.
No pressure. All right, guys, let's keep going. There's been some discussion in the community on how many hours you can work in a row as an air traffic controller. So, again, I think I've got to assume that this is different from the military and FAA perspectives. So can you guys clear this up for us? Let's start with you, Mike.
Yeah, currently for the FAA, the restriction is 10 hours in a day, 6 days, no more than 6 days in a row. And between a night and a day shift, you have to have 9 hours in between those two. Between a day and a night shift, you have to have 8 hours. And if you exceed any of those limits, you go non-op, which is basically you have to have a day off, 24 hours off, until you can be recertified, or I don't know what they specifically call it, but be able to work traffic again.
So why would you exceed that if you've been dealing with an emergency or something and it would be silly to leave your post?
Well, for us, it's usually, maybe somebody overlooked the schedule. They accidentally gave you a 1 to 9 shift, and then you came back at like 5 instead of 6.
Got it.
Yeah. Or if you, so it would be something like that. You accidentally had too many overtimes or something, 1 overtime at the beginning of your work week and 1 at the end of your work week, something like that.
Okay. And what about you, Tyler?
The military is a little bit different for our shifts. We can work no more than 12-hour shifts, but 10 of it can be controlling and 2 hours of it can be administrative.
Okay, so you're still bound by the 10-hour rule.
Exactly, but they can keep us for that extra 2 hours to do paperwork. But in between every shift, we're required a 12-hour turnaround, so not 8 or 9. We have to. So irregardless of, whether if it's a night to a day or a day to a day, it's still 12 hours in between every shift. And then 6 days, and after that 6 days, you would need a day off.
Tristan, you asked your own question on IFFG, so I'll let you answer it. And your question was, do you ever get bored with your job? Let's just get a quick answer for that one.
No.
No. Good. Justin wants to know, what is your best ATC story? Anything that stands out to you? Tristan, you've got to have something.
Of course I do. I was talking to Tyler about it this morning when we were talking on the phone. This was at Milwaukee. They have an area that's called a hot spot, which means, something bad can happen there. Something can be overlooked by a pilot, or controllers need to be kind of focused on that area because maybe it's confusing. It could be a large area of concrete that it just looks to be confusing. And I had two aircraft cross a runway there in that hot spot. And at one point, it was a FedEx heavy jet that crossed the runway. And there was a Midwest Airlines, I think it was a 717 that was departing, and it had actually just started departure roll, and that FedEx heavy just started to cross onto the runway, and I just yelled into the mic, "FedEx, stop!" And he did. I didn't use his call sign, and stop is not any official phraseology, but it seemed like the best thing to say at the time.
Right. I think some of us spend our time, some of our listeners, from time to time listening to liveatc.net or ATC kind of, I guess you'd call them highlights on YouTube. And there was someone similar. There was a runway incursion, and I think same thing. He yelled into his mic something along the lines of cancel takeoff or something, and I don't know if that's even the right.
Yeah, that actually is the proper phraseology. If somebody was to, it would be cancel takeoff, clearance, hold position, something like that. But depending on the severity of the situation or how fast something needs to happen, you say what you need to say to make it happen immediately. I mean, the last thing you want to do is have two aircraft go into each other.
Right. That would be the main goal of the entire thing, I would think.
Exactly. It doesn't matter what your phraseology is.
Just everyone stop.
Exactly.
Any other great stories before we continue here?
I'm too new to have any good stories yet. I have a lot of chow run stories, but we can save that for another
we'll do
podcast.
that's a whole other episode.
I'll throw one more into here, which was actually when I was in the Air Force. They had a big thing when I was doing air traffic in the Air Force, and it was always, you don't allow an aircraft to do a low approach behind an aircraft doing a touch and go. And I don't know if that's something that Tyler was pushed when he went through training or not, but that was the situation, and they didn't encourage that because obviously the touch and go is going to be going quite a bit slower because they're going to be on the runway, and they're going to have slowed down, and the aircraft doing a low approach isn't going to touch the runway, and they're going to be going faster. And that was the situation. It was with, I think it was two T-38s, which are fighter style training aircraft that the Air Force used at the time. I don't know if they still use them now. But anyways, the aircraft was doing a low approach, the number 2 aircraft behind that touch and go. And I was working flight data at the time, and the low approach caught up to the touch and go, and the local or tower controller told that aircraft, the number 2 aircraft, to go around on the right side of the runway, and that T-38 went around the left side of the runway. And then when the other aircraft lifted off, that local controller told them to make left traffic, so now they're both going to the left, and they missed each other by probably 20 feet. It did about it did like one of those initial drops. The aircraft on top had turned, and I actually covered my face because I was waiting for there to be a huge explosion. And luckily, they have, I believe they have TCAS, the Traffic Collision Avoidance System, and it probably went off, and that's probably what avoided a catastrophe there.
Good grief. That's when it gets really real really quickly.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, guys, we really have to get going quickly here. So there's too much, and I actually would love to do another ATC chat at some point in the future. So we might have to save some of this. I apologize, guys, if I didn't get to your question on IFFG. But we've got people who have to go do air traffic controlling for real pretty soon. So let's just we'll do. I'll ask another question, and then if you guys want to chime in at all, then we can do that before we say goodbye. So, Ian actually asked a lot of questions this week. I think it was somewhere near 50 or something, but he wanted to make sure that I had no shortage of questions to ask. So thanks, Ian, as always, for chiming in. But so in real life, there's no ghost button, obviously. So do you guys have to deal with aircraft that are not following instruction the way we do in infinite flight?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Explain. Or they don't want to. I'll answer this, and then I actually have to head off to work if you guys don't mind.
Yep, that's fine.
But, you get guys who don't want to slow down or want to go faster. They try and bargain with you, and sometimes it's in a rude way. And I've posted this up before, but, unless there's an emergency, really the pilot should be listening to you. I've had, we work Santa Barbara area, so we don't have a flow initiative where we have to give Santa Barbara approach flow, but you really can't pitch them aircraft on top of each other because they only have about 15 miles to the airport once they get them. So, or maybe, 20, 30. They really don't have a lot of room. One guy was just mad that I kept slowing him down, and so he said something on frequency, but I was pretty busy at the moment. And really the way you handle it is, if you want to talk about this on the phone, I'll give you a phone number to the center, and you can speak with my supervisor about it. And usually, like in this case, whoever was not talking originally came back and said, "Hey, sorry, it's just been a long day. No problem. Whatever you need," and right. That's usually how it gets, sorted out. That if you kind of tell them, "Hey, look, I don't have time for this," usually there's some kind of sorry or whatever. And it's not like we don't make mistakes either. Everybody's got tough days, so no hard feelings to anybody.
Tristan, Ian wants to know, we've all heard those angry ground controllers on liveatc.net and YouTube, especially at JFK, who are under a lot of stress with pilots not following instructions. There's a couple of classics, but people misinterpreting instructions. Sometimes we have to deal with language barriers, I'm sure, especially at a place like JFK. Has this ever been the case with you, and how do you react to that?
Personally, I don't want to have, we know that everything that we say is recorded as a controller, and I don't want to actually be that guy that's on YouTube as a controller. So I would, if I was frustrated with the situation, I normally would unkey the mic, and then I would say what I needed to say to the pilot where nobody would hear it except the people that I'm working with. But, everybody handles it differently. And for me, I don't want to have that recorded because, coworkers can go down to the tape room with their phone and they can record it right off of the actual recorders, and then they have it forever.
Right. Tyler, you're working as part of really one big team, so I would think that situation is extremely rare in your case.
Right, and it's pretty disciplined in the military that we really do get held to just that set phraseology from the .65, like Tristan talked about earlier. But just in the past few months, we've actually gotten a new squadron of Afghani training pilots. So that's been just a huge change for us with the cultural barrier and the language barrier. And sometimes, you start sticking to that phraseology, and phraseology can be a little bit broken. So sometimes you really just need to drop that and just try to break it down, just speak plain English and try to get your point across to make things happen, because, when aircraft are all moving at 300 knots, you don't have time to just keep repeating yourself over and over and over. Sometimes you just get straight to the point and make it happen.
All right. Alexei had some awesome questions. I think we're going to have to save most of them for next time, but this is something actually he asked that I was actually really interested in. What is the information that you've got on the flight progress strip? And there's like I said, there's all kinds of other good stuff, but what's the maximum that any controller is allowed to have if there's a limit? And I'm assuming that's on the progress strips. And Tyler, do you use those, or is it a completely different system? and is there a IF equivalent?
Yeah, we've tried to mimic it some in Infinite Flight, but for us, the flight progress strip tells the call sign. It gives the equipment suffix, so what their transponder is equipped with. It gives the type aircraft. It'll say 2/A10. If it's a flight of 2 A10s, it gives their proposed departure time, their squawk, their requested altitude, their flight plan, their destination. And then in that big box that's in the middle, Tristan can probably chime in on that part, but that's where they use just to jot down quick notes. So if you tell them climb and maintain 3,000, they'll write 030 there, and then when you tell them to go to 4,000, they'll line through 030 and write 040. So it's kind of a quick note system for controllers to keep track of instructions and stuff like that.
And there's also a section on the right-hand side of the strip. I think it has 9 boxes in it, and each air traffic facility usually has a standard operating procedure that talks about what those boxes are used for. You can put check marks in them. You'll put numbers in them. Every facility is different, and it's just handwritten things that pertain to what the controller's done. So if just for instance, if the controller was to fall over dead, they've written down everything that's happened. And if a supervisor was to step up to the position, they could look at that strip and know everything that's going on. And that way it's not just things that were in the controller's head. Everything's also written down.
Right.
Cool. Guys, there's so much we've left out. Again, thanks to everybody on IFFG and on the FlightCast page that have asked questions. I really would love to ask your questions next time, so we'll do this again. We also have a air traffic controller as part of our advanced ATC crew named Ming Lee, and he was invited, but he's actually jet-setting around the world right now on vacation. And I think he was actually going to see Aladdin today.
Nice.
So we really missed in many ways on connecting for this interview, but like I said, we had to make a change, and you guys have done this last minute, so I really appreciate it. We'll get Ming in here next time. I think he's a controller in Tokyo, possibly.
That sounds about right.
I think that's right. I'm really excited to chat with him because goodness knows there's got to be a lot of differences on the other side of the world in terms of air traffic control, and of course not having military or FAA perspective would be awesome. So guys, thanks again. Is there anything else before I let you go that you'd like to let our listeners know?
For me, I just want to say a quick thanks to Michael and Tristan. As a new controller for me, like starting an Infinite Flight, this is maybe in a selfish way, but this is more of a chance for me to stay in the books and learn new stuff. So they've been kind of my go-to guys. I'm a tower guy in the military. That is incredibly far from being an LAX center guy or having the experience of being a supervisor in the military with FAA. So I appreciate it to both of them for kind of showing me some new things and helping me learn along the way.
We will get to a lot more Infinite Flight related stuff. We touched on it today, but there's just so much we could cover and so much I wanted to ask that, I apologize if you guys wanted to hear lots about the game. It just didn't happen today. So we'll do it another time. We'll have these guys back. Guys, it has been awesome. And I think that just evidence of that is how much time we've taken to chat, and there's so much more to talk about. So thanks again for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on. It was a great time, and hope you're able to have another one of these sessions in the near future.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I look forward to coming back sometime.
Oh, I won't be inviting you, Tristan. Sorry.
Oh, well, I just said that to be nice. I didn't actually mean it.
Tristan's flipping tables over right now. Thanks, guys. That was Michael Schoelen, Tristan Hensley, and Tyler Shelton. If you have any more questions for these guys, please leave them in the comments for this episode or the Infinite Flight community forums or on Facebook. Thanks as always for listening. If you haven't already, head over to the App Store or Google Play and download Infinite Flight. Please tell your friends about FlightCast and visit flightcast.audio for more information. We would love it if you would subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and leave us a great review. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/FlightCastAudio and on Twitter at FlightCastAudio. If you have any ideas for FlightCast, please leave them in the comments. FlightCast is brought to you by Linkhouse Media on the web at linkhousemedia.com. To cover the fine print, FlightCast is not affiliated with Infinite Flight or Flying Development Studio. I'm Jason Rosewell. Thanks for listening and happy landings.
Tyler didn't pay me enough to stay this long. I was thinking it was under an hour. When he told me what the rate was going to be that I was going to get paid, it was for under an hour.
Okay. No problem. Something for me to add to the end.
That should be deleted.
I'm gonna add that to the end too every time you tell me to delete something.
That's funny.
What was I gonna ask before Facebook happened?
We're talking about training.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Okay. Crap! I should have been ready for the next one.
That better go on
right.
the end.
Yep, definitely. You guys' language is good. So far, I don't have to use my bleep button.
I
haven't had to use it yet.
I can change that if you want.
All we have to do is invite Joe, and then it'll all be downhill.
Yeah, it's game over.
He's patiently waiting in the wings, wishing he could be on the call.
We can do a podcast about Kentucky, about how great their football team is.
Yeah, you guys can do that one without me.
You'll get a wake up
who's
tomorrow
fun
morning.
You know who's fun to talk to on the phone is Mark, because of that
man.
accent.
Man.
You just laugh the entire conversation because he has that southern draw.
It's
and
great.
He always has something smart to say.
You guys realize I'm still recording, right? This is going at the end in the gag reel for sure.
We love you, Mark.
Yeah, for sure. You know, Tristan, I was supposed to ask you from Joe about your car screw up last week.
Why were you supposed to ask me that? What was the exact question?
He said, ask Tristan about his car screw up last week. Although I think his language was a bit different.
I don't recall any of that, so I won't be able to answer that one.
Okay.
But if you have any questions regarding the 7110.65, I'd be more than happy to answer that.
All right, Tristan, tell us how you got involved with the game.
Let's see. Pause. I got to think about that for a second.
Okay, I just, and for your, crap. I'm going to have to start that over.
That needs to go at the end.
We gotta do the entire podcast again.
This is terrible. Sorry, I'm supposed to be a professional here. What was I thinking?
Your word usage.
Here we go.